A newlywed couple vanished on a night trip. 10 months later, a trail cam captured this. 10 months ago, Jane Ellis, 29, and her new husband, Mark Ellis, 32, set off into Pinerest National Forest for a romantic nighttime getaway. The newlyweds, still glowing from their wedding 2 weeks prior, planned a simple evening under the stars, hiking by moonlight, camping beneath the pines. No goodbyes were left behind. No frantic calls echoed through the night. Just an empty trailhead where their silver SUV sat parked, a single tent flapping in the dawn breeze. When Mark's phone failed to ping at sunrise, alarm bells rang at the local ranger's station. Within hours, the forest buzzed with action. Search teams swarmed the woods. K9 units sniffed through thick, tangled ravines. Drones hummed above, scanning every rocky outcrop. Park helicopters swept the canopy, and volunteers combed trails in a tight grid pattern. But there was no trace, no footprints in the damp soil, no discarded sleeping bags, not a single stray water bottle. It was as if Jane and Mark had vanished into the midnight mist. By the third week, news crews clustered at the park entrance, broadcasting images of the couple's wedding photos. Jane in her white dress, Mark beaming beside her, their hands clasped under a starry sky, across national TV. As days stretched into weeks, the story grew colder. Bears were blamed. Foul play was whispered. Some speculated a rogue hiker lurked in the remote northern reaches. Every theory fizzled out. The search slowed to a halt, and the forest swallowed its silence, until 3 nights ago. At 2:17 a.m., a monitoring station in the forest's southeast corner picked up an anomaly on camera RX-47, a solar-powered trail cam perched atop Mount Razor. Normally, these cameras scan for wildlife or stray sparks from campfires, watching for signs of trouble in the dark. But on this moonless night, the feed revealed something far more chilling. First, 2 faint silhouettes appeared on a knife-edged ridge, bathed in the ghostly glow of infrared. One figure stood behind the other, unnaturally still. Then, abruptly, the rear silhouette lunged forward, pushing its counterpart over the precipice. The fallen figure vanished into the inky chasm below. The remaining shape teetered, arms outstretched, panic carved into its stance, before scrambling back into the forest. The operator at Cascade Watchtower froze the frame, heart pounding, and replayed it in slow motion. The instant of contact, the snap of limbs, the lone figure's rapid retreat. He triggered the protocol, alerting all nearby rangers and state patrol. Within minutes, a specialized rescue crew assembled. 2 forest rangers, a wildlife biologist trained in off-trail navigation, and a state trooper with night vision goggles. They piled into an unmarked black SUV loaded with rope, medical kits, and climbing gear, engines growling to life under the hush of towering pines. By first light, they reached the ridge's base, mist clinging to broken boulders and charred undergrowth from last summer's fires. Ranger Lopez led the team up a narrow gorge, ice-cold water trickling at their boots. Every snapped twig echoed in the stillness. When they emerged onto the ridge, the ground was littered with fresh scuffs, traces of frantic flight mixed with old bear scat and brittle leaves. They found no body, no shattered bones, only a single red scarf snagged on a jagged rock edge. Lopez picked it up, studying the soft fabric. "Adult size," he murmured. It didn't match Jane's purple jacket or Mark's blue cap, but the scale was unmistakable. Just then, the state trooper's radio crackled. "Base, this is Unit 47. We've got a live transmitter ping on Jane Ellis's phone. Northeast sector. Coordinates sent. Over." Relief and dread warred in the rescuers' minds. A living signal meant someone was out there, alive. But those coordinates led deeper into uncharted territory, a forbidding glacial cirque known for sheer cliffs and unstable scree fields. Back at Cascade Watchtower, trailcam operator Aaron Reed replayed the footage. He'd followed the couple's story months before: the abandoned SUV, the lonely campsite, the unanswered calls. Seeing those silhouettes on his screen made his stomach drop. He uploaded the high-res clip, complete with GPS timestamp, to Dispatch and national news wires. In seconds, the half-forgotten story blazed across social media. Ellis couple found. Trail cam captures apparent abduction near Mount Razor. By mid-morning, the valley hummed with helicopters and drones converging on that remote ridge. News choppers circled, bathing the treetops in blinding searchlights. Families gathered at the park entrance, clutching wedding photos of Jane's warm smile and Mark's hearty laugh. Yet, as the forest stirred with activity, a silent question hung in the crisp mountain air. Who was behind that push? What had become of the other spouse? And most terrifyingly, as dawn's rosy light crept over the ridge, Ranger Lopez radioed base. Units en route to the phone ping coordinates, ETA 20 minutes. In the cab of the black SUV, the trooper checked his sidearm, loading fresh magazines. The wildlife biologist, Dr. Chin, secured her spotting scope and GPS tablet. None spoke. Too much hung on the next few hours. They plunged down a narrow spur trail into a bowl-shaped cirque. The underbrush was thick, slick with dew. Every step demanded care. Loose scree crunched underfoot, sending tiny avalanches of rock tumbling into the abyss. The wind moaned through ancient pines, a mournful hum. Lopez led along a game trail barely wide enough for one. 10 months of rain and snow had erased human tracks. Only jagged hoofprints betrayed elk. As they neared the coordinates, the phone's ping faded. Dr. Chin scrolled through the data. The signal had come from a rocky ledge 500 feet above the valley floor. They reached the base of a sheer wall, split by a narrow gully above. The sun glinted off metal, Jane Ellis's carabiner clip, still attached to her backpack's strap, lodged in a crevice halfway up. The Rangers exchanged grim looks. She climbed, Lopez muttered, or was taken. A specialized rope team rappelled into the gully. The first Ranger, with Lopez at his side, descended into a shadowed cleft. He swept his flashlight beam across moss-covered boulders. Then, proof of life, a smear of crimson on granite, fresh blood glistening in the beam. Beneath it, muddy footprints led up a narrow ledge. "Forward," Lopez signaled, voice taut. They clambered along a 6-inch wide path, branches tearing at their jackets. The air grew thinner, colder. Ahead, the gully opened onto a tiny plateau ringed by crags. And there she was, Jane Ellis, slumped against a boulder, eyes closed, bruised but breathing. Her pant leg was torn, calf bleached white where bone might show. Beside her lay Mark, huddled under a shredded emergency blanket, groaning softly. "Ma'am," Lopez called, kneeling before Jane and pressing a hand to her forehead. Her eyelids fluttered. "Help Mark," she gasped. Above, the rope team secured an anchor. Medics prepared stretchers. Dr. Chin knelt beside Mark. "It's all right," she soothed. "You're safe now." But on the far rim of the plateau, just beyond a curtain of ferns, 2 sets of muddy footprints vanished into a narrow cleft. Proof that the mystery predator who'd shoved one spouse over the edge was still out there, watching. Ranger Lopez radioed base camp. "We have survivors. 1 adult female, 1 adult male evacuating now. Medevac chopper inbound." Across the ridge, the MI helicopter's rotors whined, stirring pine needles. Dr. Chin slipped an arm beneath Jane as she and Mark were gently strapped onto stretchers. Lopez secured their harnesses for hoisting. Within minutes, the chopper hovered overhead, winch lowered. Lopez guided Jane's stretcher upward, then Mark's. The hatch closed. Rotors whipped up a whirlwind of dust and pine needles. Below, the rope team swept the plateau. They found Jane's backpack, lying open, her journal, and a half-empty first aid kit inside, but no sign of whoever had driven them to the ledge. A single muddy footprint, sharpened by the morning's rain, led back into the undergrowth and disappeared around a crag. In less than 10 minutes, the chopper set down in a meadow below. Paramedics rushed Jane and Mark into ambulances. checking vitals, wrapping them in warm blankets. Jane's forehead was cool and clammy. Mark trembled, still clutching the tattered emergency blanket that had kept them alive. Jane's parents, Ellen and Peter, sprinted across the meadow toward them. Peter dropped to his knees beside Jane. "Honey, Mark," his voice cracked as he gathered them into a fierce embrace. Jane burrowed into his jacket. Mark pressed his face against Peter's arm. Jane reached out, taking Peter's face in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she whispered between shudders. "I should have—" Peter silenced her with a kiss to the forehead. "You saved each other," he said, voice thick with relief. "You both survived." Meanwhile, up on the ridge, Lopez and his team geared up for a daylight search of the cirque's rim. The park superintendent arrived, frowning at the cluster of muddy footprints near the precipice. "What are those?" he asked, pointing at the pattern. Lopez knelt, shining his light across the wet earth. "Too small for an adult boot, too large for a stray animal," he observed. Something else was up here. Dr. Chin joined him, peering at the print's ridges. "And look, at that scuff, like a crampon or some kind of metal cleat," she noted. "Whoever pushed them wore specialized gear." A low murmur rippled through the rangers. Someone had stalked the Ellis couple, forced them to the ledge, left no other trace. Back. At the meadow, Detective Ramirez arrived with Lieutenant Sado of Wildlife Enforcement. They flashed badges to Lopez and Dr. Chin. "We need that footprint cast," Ramirez said, pulling out a small metal toolkit. "And we'll take Jane's pack for processing. Those journal entries might tell us more about who they ran into. Up there." Dr. Chin handed over the pack. "She was keeping notes on the forest," Chin explained. "But her last entry is torn, punched out in a hurry." She unfolded a scrap of paper, a crude sketch of a man in full climbing harness. Labeled only Watcher. Ramirez's jaw tightened. "That's our suspect profile," he said, slipping the sketch into an evidence bag. As the Ellis couple was loaded into waiting vehicles for transport to the ranger station clinic, search teams fanned out across the upper slopes, careful to preserve every broken twig, every scuff mark. Drones with infrared cameras crisscrossed the cirque, seeking heat signatures or lingering traces of the Watcher. But all they returned were images of a sun-baked granite bowl and the hidden ledge where the couple had fought to survive. That evening, at the makeshift command post, Peter sat beside Jane and Mark, comforting them with warm soup and soft blankets. Dr. Chin joined them, offering gentle reassurance. "You're safe now," she said, brushing Jane's hair back from her forehead. "We will not rest until we find whoever did this." Outside, the roar of the chopper's rotors faded into the mountain gloom. Somewhere up on that rim, the EI Watcher was still out there, waiting for darkness to shield his next move, and the rangers vowed they'd be ready. Just before dawn the next morning, Ranger Lopez led a small tactical team back to the cirque's rim. The air hung frigid and still, mist curling along the granite walls. Lopez motioned to Wildlife Enforcement's thermal camera drone, hovering like a silent hawk above the crest. "Focus on the ledge where they fell," Lopez ordered. The drone's feed showed gleaming patches, moist footprints, broken branches tracing the couple's desperate scramble for safety. But outside that path, a second trail snaked toward a narrow cleft high above the overhang. Lieutenant Sado frowned. "That must be where the Watcher watched them," Lopez agreed. "Let's see if we can follow it." They roped in, rappelling, down into a hidden pocket of the gorge. Halfway down they found the Watcher's camp, a camouflaged bivouac nestled beneath an overhang, with a discarded morsel of freeze-dried food, a crumpled energy bar wrapper bearing a logger's logo, and most damning, a nylon harness matching the crampon scuff on the muddy print. "Got our evidence," Sado whispered, bagging the harness for forensics. Deeper in, they discovered a crude stool carved from pine. On it lay Jane's torn journal page, hastily jammed beneath a rock, 4 jagged lines of her handwriting, referencing a grinning face glimpsed between the trees. Lopez read aloud. He wore a patch over one eye, but I saw his smile. Sado shook his head. He wanted them alive, perhaps to watch them suffer or to send a message. Suddenly, their radios crackled. The drone had detected movement on the opposite rim, 2 heat signatures, adult-sized, pressing against the stone. "Stay quiet," Lopez hissed. He signaled up, a second ranger unit prepared to insert by ropes on the far cliff. Moments later, a voice echoed across the canyon. "Help us!" cried a fragile whisper. Jane's voice. Lopez's heart hammered. "They're alive!" he breathed, rushing to the drone operator to pinpoint the coordinates. On the far precipice, atop a narrow ledge, Jane and Mark Ellis, huddled beneath a worn emergency blanket, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. Beside them lay a faltering light, Jane's last flare pistol, spent. A ranger shouted, "Lo, watch your footing!" With painstaking care, the rescue team navigated the knife edge, securing the couple with harnesses and winching them to safety. Mark wept silently while Jane clutched him tight, whispering, "I knew they'd come." Less than 10 minutes later, both were aboard the waiting chopper, bundled into medics' arms. The watcher had vanished. No sign of pursuit, no trace of struggle. Back at the command post, Dr. Chin greeted them with gentle smiles and soft blankets. Mark's teeth chattered. Jane's eyes shone with relief. Through tears, they asked, "Are we safe?" Detective Ramirez approached with Lopez at his side. "You're stable," Ramirez assured them. "You're in good hands, recovering in the clinic." Just then, the forest behind them rustled. Everyone tensed, scanning for danger. A lone figure emerged. Jane, supported by 2 medics, her face pale but determined. She crossed to Mark, collapsing into his arms as the field team watched in silent awe. Peter arrived moments later, sweeping them both into his embrace. The reunion was raw and triumphant, 2 hearts beating together again against all odds. Meanwhile, Detective Ramirez pulled Lopez aside. "We've got the bivouac gear, the torn journal, and that logger's wrapper. Forensics will trace it back to a mill camp on the far side of the park. I'm requesting warrant approval for a search." Lopez nodded. "Let's end this." As dawn broke over the cirque, helicopter rotors kicked up dust and pine needles once more, this time lifting the Ellis couple to safety. Below, the bivouac remained silent testimony to the watcher's cruelty and the couple's unbreakable will to survive. Late that afternoon, while the Ellis family was flown out, Detective Ramirez convened his team at the park ranger station. Through the windows, the cirque's walls glowed gold in the sinking sun, a stark contrast to the grim task at hand. "Here's what we know," Ramirez began, spreading aerial maps and the logger's wrapper on a folding table. "Our watcher, nicknamed Grin after Jane's journal note, has ties to the Red Pine Mill, 5 miles northeast. Forensics confirmed the energy bar wrapper came from the mill's supply crib." Ramirez tapped the map. "They're private logging road loops around the ridge. Satellite imagery shows an abandoned lookout post exactly at the bend. We'll start there," Ranger Lopez chimed in. "I've arranged for a tactical team to insert by helicopter at dawn. We'll secure the site before ground teams move in." Lieutenant Sado frowned. "What about Grin's escape? If he's familiar with these cliffs, he'll vanish into the forest long before we get there." Ramirez nodded. "That's a risk. We'll deploy K9 units on multiple ridgelines and set up thermal traps along likely egress paths. We need to box him in." Meanwhile, in the makeshift medical tent, Jane Ellis was being patched up. Her wounds were largely superficial, bruises, cuts, dehydration, but her spirit was raw. Lopez approached gently. "Jane, we're moving to find who did this. Anything you recall about Grin, his voice, his gear, could help." Jane closed, her eyes drawing a shaky breath. He spoke in whispers at first, like a guide, praising our love before it turned to threats. He carried a silver compass etched with a twisted pine tree. Lopez's eyes widened. That's it. The lookout post. Its weather vane is a carved pine. It's our beacon. Back in the station, Lieutenant Sato updated the team. We've identified the lookout coordinates. Chopper in at 0500. As night fell, park rangers and officers fanned out with night vision scopes, drones hovering overhead. Thermal patterns flickered across screens. Elk, deer, but no human. At 4:45 a.m., the helicopter's spotlight snapped on, illuminating the jagged pinnacle of Red Pine Lookout. 5 men rappelled down into the clearing at its base. There, through broken glass and cracked walls, they found a scattering of personal effects. A torn wedding veil, a half-burned photo from the Ellis wedding, and lying face up on the cracked wooden floor, the silver compass Jane described. Its twisted pine engraving unmistakable. "Jackpot!" whispered Ranger Millard as he bagged the compass. A faint noise, a floorboard creaking, echoed from above. The team swept their rifles upward. On the narrow catwalk surrounding the watchtower's collapsed upper deck, a lone figure crouched, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. "Police!" Lieutenant Sato bellowed. "Come down with your hands up!" The figure bolted for the far edge. Lopez fired a warning shot into the dirt, sending gravel flying. The man skidded, nearly toppling over the cliff before regaining his footing and disappearing into the forest with the agility of a mountain cat. The team pursued on foot, tracking his thermal signature through boulders and dense underbrush, while drones relayed his every move. Branch by branch, they pressed him back toward a steep gully flanked by sheer rock. As the sun's first rays pierced the pines, Ranger Millard's K9 unit circled ahead. The dog barked, then froze, staring at a moss-covered ledge. The suspect's path ended at a dead-end drop, too sheer for any man to descend without ropes. Lieutenant Sato approached the cliff's edge and peered down. Far below, among the talus, lay a bundle of crumpled camo fabric, and, spread open on a flat rock, a page torn from Jane's journal. "I see you, Grin." He turned to Lopez. He knew we were coming and chose to vanish rather than be caught. But this ledge is a trap. He can't escape without a rope. As forensics collected the evidence, Lopez exhaled. He's cornered. Detective Ramirez arrived, scanning the drop. "Let's secure the perimeter and lower a rope team." By mid-morning, Ramirez himself rappelled down, flanked by 2 park rangers. They found a discarded climbing pack, still bearing Grin's makeshift insignia, a painted pine, its branches curving into a sinister smile. Inside were empty ration packs, a map with the cirque circled in red, and a faded snapshot. Grin as a boy, standing beside the very lookout they'd just raided. Ramirez stared at the photo, realization dawning. This wasn't just obsession. This was revenge, decades in the making. Above, a shout rang out. The tactical team had found fresh blood trails at the gully rim, evidence Grin had hurt himself trying to escape. A stretcher party was assembled. As they hauled the injured man up, handcuffed and defeated, Ramirez called out, "John Mercer, you're under arrest for kidnapping, attempted murder, and assaulting park personnel." Mercer glowered, but the glint of the silver compass in Ramirez's hand seemed to break something in his stare. Back at the ranger station, Mercer was escorted into an evidence room. Ramirez locked the door. Outside, the Ellis family, Jane, Mark, Ellen, and Peter, arrived, driven through the pre-dawn chill to witness justice. When they saw Mercer's gaunt face on the booking intake screen, Mark gasped. Jane squeezed her husband's hand. Ellen swallowed hard, then turned to Ramirez. "Thank you," she whispered. Ramirez nodded. "Your family is safe now. He won't harm another person." As dawn painted the cirque in rose and gold, the Ellis family walked out together, bound by trauma but stronger for it. Behind them, the watchtower stood abandoned once more, its twisted pine weather vane still creaking, waiting for entropy to finally claim it. That morning, with Mercer secured in custody, Detective Ramirez and Ranger Lopez gathered once more at the station. Golden light through the high windows cast long shadows over the evidence lockers. "Let's finalize his statement," Ramirez said, motioning Mercer, bruised, dusty but defiantly upright, into the interview room. Through the two-way glass, Jane watched, Mark beside her. Jane trembled, but nodded bravely. Inside, Ramirez closed the door and set the silver compass on the table. Mercer's eyes flicked to it, his trophy now turned exhibit. Ramirez leaned forward. "Why? Why Jane and Mark Ellis?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "My father died in that lookout tower, training for the Park Service. A rotten beam broke. He fell, and we found his body months later." He spat the words. No one cared. They forgot him. But I remembered. Ramirez exhaled. "So you chose a couple whose name matched his rescue team's plaque, the Ellis family, and made them pay." Mercer nodded, tears brimming. "I gave them 10 months of terror, hunger, hope. I wanted someone to care the way I did." Silence stretched. Mercer's confession filled in the blanks. How he'd rigged the ridge to trap Jane and Mark. How he'd kept them alive to sustain his revenge. How every journal page was a twisted homage to his father's memory. Outside, through the glass, Jane rose and stepped toward the door. Ramirez opened it. She entered slowly. Mercer's gaze locked on her face, resolute, loving, unbroken. "Your pain is not mine to heal," she said quietly. "But I forgive you." Mercer's defiant mask cracked. Guilt and grief warred in his eyes as he was led away in handcuffs. In the parking lot, the Ellis family embraced beneath the morning sun. Jane and Mark stood arm in arm, stronger than the cliffs that had loomed so threateningly above them. "Ranger." Lopez approached Ramirez. "Case closed," Ramirez nodded. "Mercer's motive will stand in court. But the real victory is the Ellis reunion and a dangerous man finally brought to justice." As the family drove away, Jane and Mark waving from the back seat, Lopez and Ramirez watched the taillights disappear into the winding road. "Feel like we did something good today?" Lopez asked softly. Ramirez gave a small smile. "We brought a couple home." Behind them, the restored wilderness hummed with life, scrub jays chattering, pines whispering to the wind, the canyon's hidden streams gurgling along ancient paths. A place of beauty and terror, yet redeemed by the Ellis couple's survival. As they packed away evidence, Ramirez retrieved the battered journal from the evidence locker, thumbing its pages. Mercer's raw scrawl mingled with his father's faded handwriting. Ramirez saw tragedy's cycle laid bare, loss begetting vengeance, vengeance yielding more loss. He closed the cover gently and slid it into an evidence bag. Let the court sort through it, he thought. His duty was to ensure this story ended here. Outside, the roar of a waterfall echoed from the canyon floor, a timeless backdrop to human frailty and resilience. Ramirez and Lopez paused at the overlook, gazing down at the spray-cast mist where Jane and Mark had teetered on the brink, now safely beyond its reach. Tomorrow, the park will reopen the trail, Lopez said. A plaque will be placed in your father's honor, Ramirez. He nodded. Let his name stand for courage, not cruelty. They turned away from the edge and began the long walk. Back to the ranger station, two keepers of the wild, ready to protect its visitors from both natural hazards and the darkness that sometimes seeps into even the most beautiful places. And behind them, the canyon settled into silence once more, holding its stories beneath the sunlit pines and its promise that no matter how deep the shadows may run, the light of hope will always find a way down. Thanks for sticking with the story until the end. If you enjoyed it, give this a like and share if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.